Welcome back to our channel. Today, we are going to take a look at some of the most notorious killers in history and the reasons behind why they did such heinous acts. Please note that we are discussing these cases purely for educational purposes, and not to glorify or promote violence in any way. Let's dive into the list. Number 10. John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown, was an American serial killer who terrorized the Chicago area in the 1970s. He lured young boys and young men to his home under the guise of offering them work or money. Unfortunately, Gacy's intentions were far from innocent. He would then sexually assault and murder his victims, burying their bodies under his house or disposing of them in nearby rivers. The exact number of Gacy's victims is still a subject of debate among investigators. However, it is believed that he killed at least 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978. The sheer scale of Gacy's crimes shocked the nation and left a lasting impact on the families of the victims. His case highlighted the importance of improving law enforcement practices and raising awareness about the dangers of trusting strangers. Despite his heinous acts, justice eventually caught up with John Wayne Gacy. In 1980, he was convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to death. He spent 14 years on death row before finally being executed by lethal injection in 1994. The legacy of John Wayne serves a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath a seemingly normal exterior. It also reminds us of the importance of vigilance and staying informed about the dangers that exist in the world. Number 9. Aileen Wuornos was a notorious serial killer who operated in Florida during the late 1980s and early 1990s. She was convicted of brutally murdering 7 men, making her one of the most infamous female serial killers in history. Wuornos targeted her victims while working as a prostitute along the highway of Florida. Aileen's troubled childhood played a significant role in shaping her future actions. Growing up in a challenging environment with a lot of instability, she faced abuse and neglected from a young age. As Aileen entered adulthood, she struggled to find her place in the world. Without a strong support system and positive influences, she found herself making choices that ultimately led her down a destructive path. Loneliness and desperation also played a part in Aileen's transformation. Feeling isolated and abandoned, she made decisions that spiraled out of control, leading to violent acts that shocked the world. Despite her troubled past and claims of self-defense, Wuornos was ultimately sentenced to death and executed in 2002. Number 8. Ted Bundy. He was a serial killer who preyed on young women, often luring them with his charismatic personality before committing unspeakable acts of violence. You might be wondering, how many people Ted Bundy actually killed? Well, the exact number is still unknown, but it's believed that he confessed to murdering at least 30 women during the 1970s. It's important to understand that there is no single factor that fully explains why Bundy committed such heinous crimes. One key aspect of Bundy's upbringing is tumultuous family dynamics, which may have contributed to his distorted view of relationships and violence. Additionally, Bundy's lack of empathy and his ability to manipulate others allowed him to seamlessly blend into society while carrying out his gruesome acts. Some experts believe that Bundy's deep-seated insecurities and need for control drove him to commit these brutal murders. It's chilling to think about how someone seemingly normal on the outside could harbor such dark and twisted thoughts within. In 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. His execution brought closure to many of his victims' families and marked the end of a dark chapter in American criminal history. Number 7. The Zodiac Killer, known for their series of murders in the late 1960s and early 1970s, has puzzled investigators and the public for decades. One of the factors that made the Zodiac Killer a brutal killer was their apparent need for attention and notoriety. By sending cryptic letters to the media and police, the killer sought to taunt and terrify the public, creating a sense of fear and chaos. Additionally, the Zodiac Killer's ability to evade capture and maintain a sense of power over law enforcement fueled their desire to continue their killing spree. Psychologists believe that the killer's lack and disregard for human life played a significant role in their brutal actions. Despite claiming to have taken the lives of 37 individuals, only 5 confirmed murders have been attributed to the Zodiac Killer. These victims include young couples and lone individuals who tragically crossed paths with this enigmatic and ruthless killer. The Zodiac killer's identity remains unknown to this day, adding an extra layer of mystery to an already perplexing case. The killer's ability to evade capture and leave behind a trail of fear and confusion is a testament to the chilling nature of his crimes. Number 6. Andrei Chikatilo, also known as the Butcher of Rostov, was a former schoolteacher who committed heinous crimes that shocked the world. Between 1978 and 1990, Chikatilo brutally took the lives of at least 52 innocent victims. These were not just numbers, they were real people with families and loved ones. Chikatilo's modus operandi was horrifying, preying on children, teenagers, and young adults. His heinous acts shook the entire nation and left a trail of devastation in his wake. One key factor that contributed to Chikatilo's descent into violence was his troubled childhood. Growing up during a time of war and famine, he experienced immense suffering and trauma that likely shaped his twisted psyche. Additionally, Chikatilo struggled with deep-seated feelings of inadequacy and rejection, which festered within him over the years. These feelings, combined with a lack of healthy coping mechanisms, led Chikatilo down a dark path towards committing unspeakable acts of violence. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, Chikatilo managed to evade capture for years, continuing his reign of terror unchecked. It wasn't until 1990 that he was finally apprehended and brought to justice. It's important to recognize that while we may never fully understand the complexities of a person like Chikatilo, we learn from his story to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Number 5. Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, was a notorious serial killer who terrorized California in the 1980s. During his reign of terror, Ramirez was convicted of 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. His crimes were brutal and senseless, leaving a trail of fear and devastation in their wake. While the exact number of his victims may never be known, the impact of his heinous acts continues to haunt the memories of those affected. So, what made him commit such heinous crimes? Well, experts point to a troubled childhood filled with violence and abuse. Growing up in a rough environment, Ramirez was exposed to violence at a young age, which may have desensitized him to suffering of others. Some speculate that a head injury he sustained as a child could have played a role in his violent behavior later in life. It's important to remember that while these factors may have contributed to Ramirez's actions, they do not excuse or justify his crimes in any way. Number 4. Dennis Rader terrorized the Wichita, Kansas area between the 1970s and 1990s, committing heinous crimes that shocked the nation. His nickname, BTK, stood for bind, torture, kill, which he carried out in a series of murders. So what led him to this path? First and foremost, it's important to recognize that Dennis Rader had a deeply disturbed psyche. His twisted fantasies and desires consumed him, leading to a compulsion to act out in violent ways. Growing up, Rader experienced feelings of powerlessness and lack of control in his life. These feelings likely contributed to his need to exert dominance and control over others through his brutal actions. Rader's obsession with maintaining a facade of normalcy also played a significant role in his transformation into a killer. He led a double life, appearing as an upstanding member of society while harboring dark thoughts and engaging in unspeakable acts behind closed doors. Throughout his reign of terror, Dennis confessed to taking the lives of 10 innocent victims. These victims ranged in age and background, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. Rader's crimes were meticulously planned, and he managed to evade capture for decades, striking fear into the hearts of the community. It wasn't until 2005 that Dennis Rader was finally apprehended and brought to justice for his heinous acts. Number 3. Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, was a notorious serial killer who committed heinous crimes in the 1980s and early 1990s. He murdered a total of 17 young men and boys. Each life lost was a tragedy that shook the nation to its core. His crimes were unimaginable, and the details of his gruesome acts still haunt many to this day. Dahmer's upbringing played a significant role in shaping his twisted mindset. Growing up, he experienced feelings of isolation and neglect, which likely contributed to his later actions. As a teenager, Dahmer began displaying troubling behavior, showing signs of cruelty towards animals and a fascination with death and dismemberment. His descent into darkness continued as he struggled with his own inner demons and a deep sense of alienation from around him. It's believed that Dahmer's inability to form meaningful connections with others, coupled with his escalating fantasies of control and domination, ultimately led him down a path of violence and depravity. The lack of intervention or proper mental health support also played a role in allowing Dahmer's dark desires to fester and grow unchecked. In the end, a combination of psychological factors and environmental influences tragically culminated in Jeffrey Dahmer becoming one of the most infamous serial killers in history. Dahmer met his end on November 28, 1994, at the age of 34. His death was not a result of his actions catching up with him, but rather a tragic incident in prison. While serving multiple life sentences for his gruesome murders, Dahmer was attacked by a fellow inmate and succumbed to his injuries. His death brought a mix of relief and closure to many, but also raised questions about the nature of justice and rehabilitation. Number 2. Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer, shocked the world with his heinous crimes. Ridgway confessed to the murder of 71 women, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history. However, he was convicted of 49 murders due to the evidence available at the time of his trial. He was convicted in the early 2000s. His victims were primarily young women involved in prostitution or vulnerable situations. His crimes spanned over 2 decades, from the early 1980s to the late 1990s, causing fear and devastation in the Seattle area. But what made him commit such unspeakable acts? It's believed that Ridgway's troubled childhood played a significant role in shaping his dark path. Growing up in a dysfunctional family environment can have lasting effects on a person's mental well-being. As his violent tendencies escalated, he began to target vulnerable individuals, preying on those who were less likely to be missed or pursued by law enforcement. Some experts suggest Ridgway's lack of empathy and remorse contributed to his ability to carry out these horrific crimes without feeling guilt or shame. Number 1. Jack the Ripper, the infamous serial killer who terrorized London in the late 1800s, has puzzled historians and criminologists for decades. The exact number of people Jack the Ripper killed is still unknown. Most experts agree that he murdered at least 5 women in the Whitechapel district of London. These brutal killings shocked the entire city and sparked a massive manhunt for the elusive killer. The victims, often referred to as the canonical 5, were all prostitutes and met a gruesome fate at the hands of Jack the Ripper. The murders were characterized by extreme violence and a signature modus operandi that baffled investigators at times. Despite numerous theories and suspects over the years, the true identity of Jack the Ripper remains a mystery to this day. The case continues to captivate people around the world, fueling endless speculation and fascination with this enigmatic serial killer. So what really led him down this path? One theory suggests that Jack the Ripper's brutal nature could have stemmed from a deep-seated anger or resentment towards a specific group of people. Another possibility is that Jack the Ripper may have experienced a traumatic event in his past that triggered his violent tendencies. Some experts believe that his actions were driven by a distorted sense of power and control over his victims. While we may never know for sure what made Jack the Ripper the brutal killer he was, exploring these theories can help us better understand the complexities of human behavior and the factors that can lead someone down a dark path. These individuals remind us of the darkness that can lurk within human nature, and their stories serve as chilling reminders of the capacity for evil that exists in the world. Stay safe, and until next time.